Welcome back to my channel for hopefully very interesting comparison episode. And in this episode, I want to finally do that comparison I wanted to do a while ago already, namely comparing the Leica Q3 43mm with the Hasselblad X2D Mark II and the XCD 55V, widest openness in f2.5. And a while ago, I was already going pregnant with doing this comparison. But it never happened. And honestly, I don't know why. But I covered basically an intermediate, very important step, namely posting a video sometime back about the field of view of the Q3 43 and the Hasselblad X2D Mark II with the XCD 55V, and trying to empirically prove that the field of view is the same. And I come back to this point in the course of the video. Here now is my fully fledged comparison. You will hear about all the similarities, but also about all the differences of these two cameras. Let's kick it off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. Many thanks for that. All right, what's the point doing this comparison? And my anchor point why I was interested in the field of view of the Q3 43 and the X2D Mark II with the XCD 55V is that the field of view, the way the image is taken, if you forget a moment about different aspect ratios, because here we have a 3:2 aspect ratio and here we have a 4:3 aspect ratio, the field of view should be about the same. And the reason is that the Hasselblad XCD 55V here on a medium format sensor with 44x33mm dimensions should, with a crop factor of 0.79, yield to a full frame equivalent focal length of 43mm. So the field of view of these two cameras should be the same. It took me a while to empirically confirm that, and I did it back then in a video where I will post the link down below in the info box. And it turned out, yes indeed, the 55V on the medium format X2D Mark II sensor and the 43mm Apo-Summicron widest open f2.0 on the Leica Q3 camera body, but fixed mounted. Also here I come back to this topic in a moment. They have indeed the same field of view, and it was quite some effort to empirically confirm that. And if you have not seen that video, please look it up and come up with your own thoughts. So after I confirmed that the field of view of these two camera lens combinations is kind of the same, I thought maybe if you are an owner of a Hasselblad X2D Mark II and you own the XCD 55V, but you are playing with the thought to purchase a Leica Q3 43, maybe I could make a statement that it is not necessary because they both cover the same field of view. And I will go into some live demonstrations in a moment with both cameras here and show you certain aspects of the greater context. But you know, it turns out that, yes, the field of view of these two cameras is the same, and there are some other similarities, which I will discuss when we come to sensor comparison, because this Leica Q3 43 comes actually, although it has only a full frame sensor with 36x24mm dimensions, very close in its sensor properties to the medium format 44x33mm sensor, which is in the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. And on one side, this is astonishing because we all believe as pro photographers for many years that the larger the sensor, the better quality you get in your images. And that's generally true. I'm not going to basically contradict this statement, but full frame sensors in a like-for-like comparison today, in particular if they are from Leica here, like in this case, they come pretty close in their properties to the larger medium format sensors. Now, when I say the sensor in the Leica Q3 43 comes from Leica, that's not completely true. And maybe that's the flip side of the coin. On one side, it's astonishing that the image quality comes so close. On the flip side of the coin, it's not so astonishing because the manufacturer of both sensors in these two cameras is actually Sony. And Sony is, in the photography world, the king of sensors, period. And by the way, the Leica Q3 43, but also the Leica Q3 28, the Leica SL3 camera, the Leica M11, M11P, what have you, and the Hasselblad X2D Mark II are by far not the only modern digital cameras which have internally a Sony sensor built in. And, you know, I cannot exclude that manufacturers do tweak that sensor into a Sony sensor derivative, but at the very end, the sensor is from Sony. And that's also true for these two cameras. So it's not so astonishing, but it is astonishing that the image quality comes close. And I will do a direct comparison of sensor curves for the Leica Q3 43 from photons to photos with the corresponding curves for the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. So let's go in a systematic way in a side-by-side comparison of these two cameras. And coming back to what I mentioned at the beginning, a 55mm focal length on a 44x33mm sensor with a crop factor of 0.79 boils down exactly to a 43mm focal length in a full frame equivalent field of view. And that's what we find in the specifications of this lens. I'm just quickly showing it here. That's what Hasselblad, the manufacturer of the camera body and the lens, is publishing. So we end up in a full frame equivalent field of view context at a 43mm focal length. And that's exactly the focal length of this beautiful Apo-Summicron lens, which sits here in the Leica Q3 43. So from a field of view point of view, these camera lens combinations are equivalent. Now, when I talk about field of view, I mainly mean the angle of view, because we have different aspect ratios on these two cameras. And let me quickly show you. This one here is a 3:2 aspect ratio, and the medium format sensor typically has a 4:3 aspect ratio. That means that based on the different aspect ratios, if you shoot the two cameras side by side, you will not get exactly the same image composition as what you would expect when I say the field of view is exactly the same, but nevertheless quite comparable. Now, there will be smart Hasselblad shooters, and they are for sure watching this video, who will say, well, the Hasselblad X2D Mark II has crop modes integrated. Why don't you crop into an aspect ratio of 3:2? And then the images should be exactly the same in terms of image composition. But unfortunately, they are not. And I'm going to show you quickly why. If we go here into the crop modes, we find here the crop modes. And you see here, we can choose here until we find 3:2. But that's a 6x9. That's not what you want. You want this one here, with the dimensions of a full frame sensor, so 36mm times 24mm. And if I choose that and make sure that I see the mask here for the cropping, you will see that it cuts off here also on the side. And that means the image you shoot will not be as wide as you would expect what you get from a Leica Q3 43. So that is definitely not a solution to make these two cameras fully compatible from an image composition point of view if you shoot them side by side. What can we say about widest open aperture? Well, here on the Apo-Summicron 43mm, the widest open aperture is an f2.0. And here on the Hasselblad, if we look inside here, it is an f2.5. And guess what? If you multiply an f2.5 into a full frame equivalent depth of field context by a crop factor of 0.79, you end up, give or take, again by a widest open aperture of f2.0. So technically, from a field of view perspective, and I showed you the specifications even on the Hasselblad website as available for this lens here, from a technical perspective, the field of view and the depth of field you can achieve with the widest open aperture setting, they are compatible for these two cameras, and that makes a direct comparison very natural. From a form and size factor, well, it is what it is. If you want to simulate a Leica Q3 43 with a Hasselblad X2D Mark II and an XCD 55, you have a more bulky camera lens combination. If you look here, This is significantly larger, is significantly more bulkier, and is also, as I will show later in specifications, significantly more heavy in terms of weight. So this is not really what appears to be like a compact camera. And in fact, it is a system camera, of course, and that's one of the biggest differences between these two cameras here in front of me on the table. Here we have a system camera. You can mount any XCD lens from Hasselblad. You can also mount older lenses from Hasselblad. You can, with adapters, shoot any kind of third-party lenses on that camera body. And you have here, of course, a fully-fledged system camera platform where you get a lot of flexibility in terms of what lens you want to shoot on that camera body. The Leica Q3 43, of course, is a compact camera. And that means the Apo-Summicron here is fixed mounted onto the camera body. And there is no way to change lenses here. And that, of course, reduces your flexibility dramatically. If you would say, this is my one and only camera, 43mm is what you are shooting for the rest of your photography career, because no other lens will ever be mounted on that camera body. You have the option to switch to a Leica Q3 28mm. If you are a monochrome shooter, you can have the Q3 28 with the Summilux lens, widest open f1.7, also with a monochrome sensor. But that's it. The Q3 platform lives and breathes 28mm and 43mm, and there is no alternative, nothing you can do. The next significant difference we have in these two cameras here, when we compare them side by side, is, and I mentioned repeatedly, here we have a medium format sensor. In brackets, it's from Sony, 44 times 33mm of dimensions. And here we have a full frame sensor, one of the best full frame sensors on planet Earth, but with smaller dimensions than the medium format sensor. It's 36 times 24mm. And here we have give or take 60 megapixel, and here we have give or take 100 megapixels. So also in terms of resolution, these sensors are very different. Having said that, I will show you in the course of the video a complete comparison of these two sensors, and astonishingly, as mentioned at the beginning of the video, in a like-for-like comparison, the quality coming from this full frame sensor gets very close to the quality you get from this medium format sensor. And that's astonishing, of course, and shows how much development has pushed the curve further on full frame sensors in the last years. Both camera sensors are so-called BSI CMOS sensors, so that means almost the newest technology. I think the newest you can have these days is probably a stacked image sensor, but BSI stands for backside illuminated and means that both cameras have excellent image quality when you shoot them in low light. And I've shown many night photography scenes on my channel on both cameras. And they confirm basically what I just said, that you can take spectacular images with these two cameras at night. The last important information on the two camera sensors I want to provide is the pixel pitch. And the pixel pitch is basically, you could also call it the pixel size of these sensors, is kind of almost exactly the same. And since we have here a smaller area sensor, here a larger area sensor, but here we have significantly more resolution, 100 megapixel, here 60 megapixel, the pixel pitch is about the same. I'm going to show you the numbers when we just revisit the specifications in a moment. And that is also one of the underlying reasons why in a like-for-like comparison, the image quality of a Q3 43 comes pretty close to a Hasselblad X2D Mark II. That's just a fact we need to accept, besides, of course, the advantage you always have with a larger sensor, which we'll also see later in the sensor curves when we discuss a comparison of the two sensors side by side based on data from photons to photo. The maximum color depth is different. Let me quickly show you on the Hasselblad here. If I go in here and go to quality, then you see here we have bit depth for RAW, and we can choose between 14-bit and 16-bit. And for me, I think I mentioned this in a couple of tutorials, I always go for 16-bit depth for RAW in terms of colors. On the Leica Q3 43, there is no 16-bit option. It's only 14 bits, which you get at the maximum color depth. And the best way to see this, if you go to quality of images here, you won't see it. I show you here, if you go to file format, you have here in my setting large DNG, so the raw file in the maximum resolution, and LJPEG. But you see it in drive mode. If you go to drive mode and you go to continuous shooting, then here you see with 2 frames per second and 4 frames per second, you still get full autofocus capabilities and 14-bit. And 14-bit is end of story. There is not more in terms of color depth you get on the Leica Q3. So here clearly the medium format camera here, the Hasselblad X2D Mark II with its 16-bit depth for RAW, has an advantage. In terms of ISO sensitivity, we also have differences here. And if I tap here on the ISO button, you see the lowest setting on ISO I can choose on the Hasselblad is an ISO of 50, which is also the base or native ISO of the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. On the X2D, it used to be 64. Now Hasselblad pushed the boundary a bit and says 50 is the base or native ISO. And on the Leica Q3 43, it actually is an ISO of 100. If we go here into the ISO settings, and you see I can go down to 50 and can then also increase my ISO value here, of course. But Leica clearly says the base, the native ISO, which basically means the sensitivity where you get the cleanest signal from the camera sensor, is an ISO of 100. And if you go down to 50, that's in the so-called extended ISO range. So also here we have differences, and we'll revisit these two data points, an ISO of 50 and 100, when we look into sensor curves from photons to photos in a moment. The ISO range of both cameras also is different. If I tap here again on the ISO button, I can go here up to 25,600 ISO. And on the Leica Q3 43, I can go significantly beyond that. And by the way, let me get that crop mode out. Otherwise, I forget it for my next shooting and will get disappointed. So no crop is what I want here. 645 format. And here on the Leica Q3, if we go into the menu and we tap on ISO, we can go here very, very high in sensitivity up to an ISO of 100,000, whereas on the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, you can't go beyond 25,600. And that is, of course, also a difference here when we talk about the ISO range. The next difference I want to call out between these two camera lens combinations is the way they manage image stabilization. And the Leica Q3, not only the 43mm version, also the 28mm version and the monochrome version, they have optical image stabilization in the lens. And typically, if the camera is switched off, you can hear image stabilization in a lens. Let me try to shake it a little bit. Let's see if we hear some noise. Let me get these things here fixed. You hear this? There are some loose components inside. I'll stop here now, otherwise that camera lens combination here will get a headache. And you hear optical image stabilization in the lens by some noise. You even hear it with some smartphones. If you shake them, if they have OIS integrated, and OIS is the acronym for optical image stabilization. On the Hasselblad X2D, image stabilization is differently solved. Here on the X2D Mark II, we have in-body image stabilization by a sensor that is freely floating in a magnetic field and has room to maneuver, and this way can compensate for tiny little shakes and vibrations. And that is a more powerful way of image stabilization. Maybe also here I can show this to you. Let me quickly open this up here. Let me show you the sensor for a moment. And if you look here at the sensor, let me get some swap here. If you look at the sensor, you see this sensor is moving. I can touch it and it's moving. Look at that. I don't know if you can see it. I try again. You see how this is embedded into moving parts here? Quite nice. So we can easily see this here. Let's get the lens mounted again. Red dot is at 12 o'clock on the X system. Here we go. Easy like that. And that makes a big difference also in the efficiency and effectiveness of the in-body image stabilization. So on the Leica Q3, I think you get about 3 full stops of gain based on optical image stabilization. According to the specifications, the Hasselblad X2D Mark II manages up to 10 full stops, longer exposures handheld by in-body image stabilization with this sensor that is freely floating in a magnetic field. And that is insane. And one of the very early videos I posted about the Hasselblad X2D Mark II was my live testing of the in-body image stabilization. And I managed to shoot up to 3 seconds handheld, and I don't have the most calm hands in the world. So this is definitely much more you can do on the Hasselblad system than on the compact Q3 cameras. And here you can go beyond the magic 1 second exposure mark we are handheld shooting, which you cannot do at a Leica Q3 43. At this point in time, let me quickly return to the lenses and let me comment on both lenses. So in the Leica world, Apo-Summicron stands for the best of the best. And I really like my Q3 43 over the Q3 28. The Q3 28 is of course better for landscape because based on a 28mm field of view, you get more into the scene and your angle of view is just wider. But the Apo-Summicron 43mm, in my personal opinion, is one of the best lenses Leica ever designed. And it comes fixed mounted here on a camera body. And by coincidence, 43mm of focal length is exactly the sensor diagonal of the full frame sensor 36x24mm sitting in the Leica Q3 43. And according to Leica, that also helps to prevent any type of distortions and gives a very clean image, which I can confirm based on experience, of course, not on scientific background, but on shooting experience and looking at images I've shot with that lens. Coming to the XCD 55V, I will do a separate video about this camera lens combination here very soon. I've shown this lens before on the channel and I commented on it, but I want to repeat it because I think this lens deserves kind of not a second review, but a second encounter on my channel because it's such a great lens. The XCD 55V, in my opinion, is one of the best lenses you can have and shoot on your Hasselblad X2D Mark II. It's an absolutely fabulous lens in terms of image quality, sharpness, what have you. Now, of course, on the Q3, you have this magic rotation here to go into macro mode. And if you rotate here, you see how the scale changes. And then you are in macro mode and in a close distance shooting setup. Here you are in the normal setting. Here the scale changes, the distance scale. You are in the close-up shooting situation. And macro is a little bit misleading because for me, in my own definitions, macro starts from a magnification of at least 50%. For many other people, it starts at a one-on-one magnification, so 100%. So macro is a little bit an exaggeration here, but it is a really solid lens for close-up shootings. And I showed in the past, if you mount here the L Pro 52 from Leica, you actually can go very close to your subject and get almost macro type quality images. And I like that a lot. And here on the XCD 55V, of course, you don't have a macro mode, but you also have a manual focusing mode, and you just pull the focus ring away from the camera body, and then you get the distance scale here in combination with the aperture scale. You can figure out roughly what your depth of field will be, and you have a very solid lens for manual focus, but no macro mode, of course. This ring here is a function ring which you can program in the menu, and for instance, you can steer with it your aperture if you want. So you have no macro setting here, or we should probably more correct, not call it macro setting, but close-up shooting setting. But in the same way as where you can mount here the L Pro 52, you can here mount the in-between lens tubes. And I have a video about that on my channel, and that increases the magnification of kind of every XCD lens you might have in your portfolio dramatically, and enables for almost any lens very nice close-up photography. And that's what I at least wanted to mention here. I also want to quickly talk about image quality coming from the lens. I've shown many images shot with this here, the Leica Q3 43, and shown them on the channel. I've shot many images with the XCD 55V, but I collected a few of these images to show you the quality these lenses are providing, and will quickly do a 90-second slideshow now. Let's now talk about the autofocus system in both cameras. And first of all, just to get it behind us, in terms of manual focus, both cameras are very much compatible. They both have magnification, focus peaking, what have you. And you can use both camera lens combinations easy for manual focus and get nice footage. On the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, we also have the focus indicator. I just posted a video tutorial about manual focusing this camera here, and I'll post the link down below in the info box so you can look it up. But in terms of manual focus, fully compatible, and both cameras will deliver nice footage if you go into manual focus mode. On the autofocus system, of course, there is a reason why I never did these type of comparisons with a Hasselblad X2D, because it's just unfair. The Hasselblad X2D's autofocus system, and I'm talking about the Mark I, is absolutely no match for a Leica Q autofocus system. But that completely changed with the introduction of the X2D Mark II, because the X2D Mark II now has face detection and LiDAR autofocus, and it has finally continuous autofocus, subject tracking, and subject detection. And if I switch on the camera again, I can quickly show this to you so you see it, but maybe you have also seen it already on the channel somewhere. Let's get Jennifer a little bit out of the way so we can focus. And if we go here into the menu, and I posted a fully fledged autofocus tutorial about this camera on the channel. Again, we'll post a link down below in the info box so you can look it up. You have here also now autofocus continuous with compatible lenses, and you can go here into subject detection for humans, cat, dogs, vehicles, or you can switch it off. And that works pretty well. If we go in that here, we'll see how Jennifer's face is recognized, and you see how this is snappy and working. And it's also tracking if I go into the tracking mode. And that is something we have implemented on Leica Q cameras for a longer time. If I go here into the control screen, and then I can change here autofocus single into autofocus continuous. I can go here into tracking mode and have then my tracking mode. And here I can go into autofocus detection. So we have human eye, face, body, human eye, face. We also have animals, and we have animal eye and body. And here was animal bodies only. And then it will very quickly also recognize Jennifer. If we look into that, sorry, I messed it up. I was on animal and Jennifer, guys. How could that happen to me? It's not an animal. It's a human being. Well, kind of a human being, not a real human being, but let's go here to eye and face and let's see. And now it should actually recognize here. You see it, and it's also sticky. Jennifer's face. You see the green rectangle or square here getting sticky on her head and her face. And that is really where both cameras now become comparable with the X2D Mark I. This would not have been possible. And the autofocus system here is also really good. We saw on both cameras, we have subject detection. On both cameras, we have face detection, face with pH. Here we have also the LiDAR functionality. And here we have face detection and contrast detection combined. So we have on both cameras a very strong autofocus system. Now, having said that, in my shooting experience, I can only talk about myself and don't want to anticipate your own experiences you've made if you have shot both camera lens combinations. The autofocus system on the Leica is a bit more snappy, a bit quicker, and a bit more spot on. But compared to what we had before on former X cameras, the Hasselblad X2D Mark II is a real and true game changer. And I love now shooting people with this camera, and in particular also with the 55V. It just makes such a big difference of what I used to from the Hasselblad X2D, and I'm talking about the Mark I. Absolutely fabulous what we have now in this medium format system here. The next topic is storage, and there are also significant differences here. So let's start with the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. And here we have a compact flash express type B card, and this is the fastest you can have on a camera system, compact flash express type B, besides of course internal storage. And here we also have internal storage. If I go here into storage, you see we have an internal SSD with close to 1 terabyte, and then we have of course the compact flash express type B. And that is a big advantage, because even if you forget your memory card at home, you will always carry up to 1 terabyte of space with you in the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. I think that's an absolutely fantastic feature to have. On the Leica Q3, you don't have any internal storage, and the SD card is sitting here. You see it here. It's an SD card. I have here, like most of the time, a Sony TUF series card, 256 GB. It's one of the fastest SD cards you can have, but is absolutely no match, of course, to internal storage in the form of SSD or to a compact flash express type B card. So here we also see significant differences where the more bulky, the more heavy, and in combination, we come to that in a moment, the more expensive camera lens combination here in the Hasselblad universe has big advantages over the Leica Q3 43. In terms of windows into the world, when you look through the camera, we have here OLED electronic viewfinders, and they have both 5.76 million dots. They are absolutely compatible. And also when you shoot them, they are both a pleasure to shoot with. So you have really good EVFs, OLED as I said. And in terms of LCD screen here, both are tiltable. You see this here. So you can shoot from different angles. For instance, waist level shooting here. And you can do the same on the Leica Q3 43. Look here, we can tilt this and get a waist level shooting situation or overhead, what have you. That's the same functionality on both cameras, but the size of the LCD on the Hasselblad X2D Mark II is larger. We talk here about 3.6 inch compared to 3 inch. And of course, they also have the corresponding different aspect ratio matching their sensor aspect ratio. Here we have a 3:2 and here we have a 4:3. And then there is one more difference I want to mention before we look again in a systematic way back into a list of specifications, see if I covered everything in my live demonstrations here and what I probably left out so I can edit. There is one more difference I want to call out here, and that's the weather sealing. Leica is actually giving you a commitment. They say the Leica Q3 43 is weather sealed with respect to an IP52 rating. And that means you have also claims against the manufacturer, which is Leica, if the camera lens combination is not showing adherence to the IP52 standard. On the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, we don't really have a commitment from Hasselblad about the weather sealing. I personally believe, but that's good faith, that the camera is weather sealed. It's also very robust. And I think it is kind of, let me switch this off for a moment. I think it is even common belief in the community that it is weather sealed, and all the XCD lenses also have a rubber sealing. Let me quickly show you. And you see it here, there's a very solid rubber sealing. So I have a hard time believing that if you shoot that camera lens combination, it will not withstand in the same way the elements like rain, dust, what have you, as a Leica Q3 43, but you don't have a commitment. There is no IP rating available for the Hasselblad X2D Mark II and its lenses, whereas in the Leica world, Leica says this is IP52, and whatever IP52 is telling you about weather sealing against splash water and dust, that is what we will guarantee as a manufacturer. Of course, that makes a difference, right? All right, so here is the comparison table I just outlined in the live demonstrations, and I think I mentioned almost everything on here. What I did not mention, I think, is just below the middle of the page, the continuous shooting capabilities. The X2D Mark II has 3 frames per second. The Leica Q3 43 theoretically can go up to 15 frames per second in electronic shutter mode. But I showed you before live that if you want to stick to 14-bit color depth, 4 frames per second is end of story. So I think the comparison is almost not fair. The Leica is a little bit faster when it comes to continuous shooting, but not significantly faster. I want to summarize some of my points here very quickly and see what it boils down to. The advantages of the X2D Mark II with the XCD 55V are the following. We have an interchangeable lens system, so we are talking about a system camera here, which gives you way of more flexibility for a higher price tag, of course. I come to pricing in a moment. We have a larger sensor, medium format, 44 x 33 mm compared to 36 x 24 mm. We have 16-bit color depth in RAW compared to 14-bit on the Leica side. We have a lower base native ISO of 50 compared to 100 on the Leica side. We have more powerful image stabilization based on IBIS, so in-body image stabilization with theoretically up to 10 full stops. On the Leica Q3 43, we have only optical image stabilization in the lens, and I showed you when shaking the camera how that stabilization mechanism makes some noise. We have an internal SSD, and that's a very powerful advantage with 1 terabyte that's built into the camera body. We have faster memory cards with compact flash express type B, and we have a larger rear LCD screen. What are the disadvantages you have on the Hasselblad side? Well, we have a camera lens combo that is more expensive. As I said, pricing in a moment. We have absolutely no video shooting capabilities, and that is something Hasselblad changed a while ago. I think one of the earlier X system cameras had up to 2.5K video shooting capabilities. Hasselblad completely eliminated that. No one really knows why, but maybe the reason is that Hasselblad shooters go for still image photography and not for videography. You have no specific IP rating for weather sealing, I mentioned that, and you have more weight because the camera body itself is already a bit more heavy than the Leica Q3 43, and the lens contributes on top another 372 gram. On the Q3 43 side, what are the advantages? Well, it's an all-in-one camera concept, very compact, more lean, in terms of size and form, smaller than the Hasselblad camera lens combination. It's an excellent built-in lens in the same way as the XCD 55V is an excellent lens. The Apo-Summicron 43mm is the best of the best Leica can offer. Leica commits an IP52 specified weather sealing. We have a slightly faster autofocus system, and we have full video shooting capabilities with full tracking features up to 8K resolution, which is insane for a compact camera. Travelers will appreciate the compact design, the close-up mode when you turn that ring into macro mode, and the focal length with 43mm is a normal focal length, so it corresponds to the vision the human eye has, and it matches in magical ways the sensor diagonal of the full frame sensor sitting in the camera, which is also 43mm, and that is really positive to avoid distortions and any kind of problems with your images. Restrictions you will have to accept: you are bound to 1 focal length only, 43mm. That's what you get, not more, not less, not wider in terms of angle, not more narrow. Well, you can do a digital crop, of course, then you get a more narrow angle. You have a lower resolution compared to the X2D Mark II of 60 megapixel versus 100 megapixel, and that's basically the main restrictions you have when you decide for a Q3 43 only without having any other camera lens combination in your backpack. Let's do a quick price comparison, and it turns out when I use B&H in the US as my reference, I visited the store in New York City many times, that the Leica Q3 43 has about the exactly same price tag as the X2D Mark II camera body. We talk about, give or take, $7,400 on both sides. But of course, on the Hasselblad side, you're shooting a camera body without a lens, and a lens is a must-have accessory for a system camera. And if you decide for that 55mm lens, which has the same field of view and the same widest open aperture in a full frame equivalent context from a depth of field perspective as the Leica Q3 43, it will burn a hole of another 3.7K into your wallet. And if we sum this all up, we end up for the camera lens combination in the Leica Cam, which is a compact camera, at $7,380. And on the camera lens combination for the Hasselblad, you spend $11,098, so roughly 11.1K in terms of US dollars. So you're significantly more expensive in the Hasselblad camp, but you also bought yourself a system camera which can be used with many other Hasselblad and third-party lenses with a lot of flexibility in terms of focal length and widest open aperture. The last big topic I want to cover in this video is the sensor comparison, and the source I'm using this time is not my own testing like I did a couple of times in the past. I really want to go to the generally recognized photons2photos.net page, and you find there all the curves I need for the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, but you don't find curves for the Leica Q3 43. So I will use all the data points from the Leica Q3 28 as a proxy. Why do I consider this to be a legitimate proxy? Well, first of all, it's the same sensor architecture. Second, it's the same image processing platform with the same Maestro 4 processor and similar analog to digital conversion gain architecture. And photons to photos really measures sensor physics so that we have a different lens, namely a 28mm instead of a 43mm Apo-Summicron will not move the needle. The lens differences affect light transmission, but not the sensor electronics. That's what photons to photos is measuring. And the Leica lens calibration mainly affects optical corrections, typically like vignetting, color shading, not fundamental sensor noise statistics. And that's why I think I'm safe here. I have a little illustration on the right-hand side where you see this. The light from the scene is going through the optics to the sensor. Of course, the lens is the gateway to the sensor, but the measurements as they are done by photons to photos, they really concern only the part where the sensor kicks in the third layer or level of this illustration. When we talk about analog electronics, conversion gain, read noise, analog to digital conversion, digital numbers, raw values, dynamic range, read noise, ISO behavior, all of that. And lens corrections, color profiles, they typically don't matter for the type of analysis photons to photos is doing. So I consider the Leica Q3 curves to be a legitimate proxy for the not existing Leica Q3 43 curves. And to be on the safe side, I know a lot of you hate AI assistance, but I asked ChatGPT with reference to the website a proper prompt. And of course, the data points I was able to provide. What do you think is the tolerance, the level of deviation we might get? And after thinking for a while, ChatGPT said it's likely below 0.05 EVs. When we talk about dynamic range, for me, that's quite acceptable. I want to start with photographic dynamic range, acronymed PDR. And you see here the corresponding curves from photons to photos. The light blue one is the Hasselblad X2D Mark II sensor. And the black one is the Leica Q3 sensor, which I use for the rationale and the reasoning I just outlined as a proxy for the Leica Q3 43, since they share the same common sensor. And you see the blue curve, the Hasselblad curve is consistently in terms of dynamic range on top of the Leica Q3 43. And I want to point out a few things here which are interesting. First of all, if we talk about base ISO, I mentioned before the base ISO for the X2D Mark II is 50 and for the Q3 43 is 100. And of course, if we look at these data points, so at ISO 50, in the native or base ISO, the X2D Mark II has 12.5 EVs, which is, by the way, significantly lower than what the Hasselblad specifications say, but that's what photons to photos measured. And at ISO 100, it's a bit lower at 11.6 exposure values. The Q3 43 at an ISO of 50 has 10.6 EVs, and at ISO 100, it has 11.1. And if we are fair, we should compare the dynamic range at the respective base or native ISO values. So we need to compare the 12.5 with 11.1, which is a difference at the respective base ISO of 1.4 stops. That's not so much apart, right? And if you look actually at the ISO 100 value, you see that on the base ISO of the Leica Q3 43, the Leica camera comes pretty close to the photographic dynamic range of its medium format competitor. And that is remarkable. And in general, the curves do not have that much of a difference if you look there. There's always a little bit of headroom between the black curve and the light blue curve. But as I mentioned repeatedly in the video before, astonishingly, the full-frame Leica Q3 43 in terms of dynamic range comes pretty close to its medium format competitor, the X2D Mark II. We have here on the right-hand side in the light blue curve this plateau, and I showed that in previous videos already. It indicates that the X2D Mark II becomes essentially ISO invariant in that region, and that increasing ISO in this particular section of the curve is no longer reducing the photographic dynamic range. And then, of course, for both cameras, we see that dynamic range declines with increasing ISO. That's totally normal and is due to the amplification of noise. If you increase ISO sensitivities, you just put more amplification on the formerly pure, clean signal from the sensor. Then, if we conclude that, the larger medium format sensor preserves extra stops of dynamic range, especially noticeable in the shadows and in highlight recovery. And that is something we all would naturally expect based on the more blunt statement that a larger sensor in general has advantages in terms of image quality. The next curves I want to talk about are shadow improvements. And you see here, the Leica Q3 curve is consistently on top of the Hasselblad X2D Mark II curve. And that is interesting, of course. And let me also here, first of all, tell you what these curves are telling us. It basically shows us how much shadow detail can be recovered by increasing ISO instead of brightening in post. So I'm talking about increasing the in-camera ISO value, so the sensitivity in the camera, instead of doing this later in post by just pushing the exposure slider in Lightroom to the right-hand side. And what we see here is the Leica Q3 43 shows strong ISO-based shadow improvement, with steep improvements already starting very early at an ISO of 100, whereas the X2D Mark II shows much smaller gains with increasing ISO, and the improvements start at an ISO of 200. If you want to put this into a summary statement, what it basically says is the Q3 43 benefits more from increasing ISO in camera rather than pushing exposure later in post. And that's an interesting sequence of events, right? And for the Leica Q3 43, it is better you increase the ISO in camera than later using, for instance, the exposure slider in your post-processing software. For the X2D Mark II, we find that the camera is closer to being ISO invariant for shadow improvement. And I think all these data points, besides that I want to do a sensor comparison here, they might be valuable for your shooting in the way you set up the camera and in the way you post-process the images later in your post-processing software. Looking into read noise, and again, let me quickly say what that means. Read noise in logarithmic dn, and dn stands for digital numbers here. In the technical term, is the sensor's electronic noise expressed in logarithmic digital output units produced by the camera's ADC, and the ADC is the analog to digital converter that transforms the analog signals into digital numbers, which we can then analyze. And what we see here is that at every ISO level, the Q3 43 shows actually lower read noise after digitization by the analog to digital converter. What we also see on both cameras is, and that's expected, the noise increases with ISO on both cameras. Again, on the light blue curve for the Hasselblad, building a little bit of a plateau here where we see an element of ISO invariance. And if we summarize what we see here, we can say the lower read noise in digital numbers of the Q3 43 mainly reflects different conversion gain and ADC scaling. It does not reflect pixel size differences because both sensors, and I showed this in the specification table before, have almost identical pixel pitch. And for the Hasselblad X2D, we have 3.76 micrometer. And for the Leica Q3 43, we have 3.79 micrometer, so almost identical. Here is now my quick summary, and everything what you see on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, I already mentioned when I talked about advantages and disadvantages of the two camera lens combinations. What I want to focus on is the box in the middle. And what everything I said in the last minutes boils down to is the following. Both cameras are top-notch in image quality, design, features, and technical sophistication. The Hasselblad camera lens combination is more expensive, but you also get a fully fledged medium format system camera where you can mount many other lenses and you're not stuck with one focal length only, which is 43mm on the Leica Q3 43. The Q3 43 comes close to medium format image quality with about the same pixel pitch as the X2D Mark II and a lower but close dynamic range. And you saw the curves, they were not that much apart from each other. The dynamic range advantages of the Hasselblad X2D Mark II are mainly due to its larger sensor area because, I mentioned it repeatedly now, the pixel pitch is the same. It really is the larger sensor area that creates a bit of an advantage here. And let me phrase it this way. If you want the top-notch value in the system camera world with still image shooting only, no video capabilities, if you can basically accept that you will never shoot videos with that camera lens combination, and if you have the budget, then the Hasselblad X2D Mark II is one of the best choices you can make. I shoot this camera all the time. I shoot it for my own pleasure and entertainment. I shoot it a lot for clients, and just recently I delivered high resolution images for very large prints, several meter times several meter, which I all did with the Hasselblad X2D Mark II and corresponding lenses. So this is really one of the best choices you can do and you can make in a system camera world. If you also need video shooting capabilities, then the X2D Mark II is clearly the wrong choice for you, because you will get only still image photography. On the flip side of the coin, if you can live with one 43mm focal length only, and if you're looking for a compact travel companion with pro photography skills, with close to medium format image quality, and with an absolutely fantastic lens and focal length of 43mm, then the Leica Q3 43 is probably the best and definitely a very excellent choice you can make. I love this camera, and as I mentioned before, I actually love it more than my Leica Q3 28, although this was for a long time one of my most favorite cameras. I just think the combination of still landscape photography, but also people photography with a 43mm Apo-Summicron with widest open f2.0 is absolutely gorgeous. And I personally love that camera, and I had it with me on travel many times. That is basically what it boils down to. Now let me quickly conclude the video, because I want to add a few more points I have not mentioned so far. All right, a lot of material I provided again for you with a lot of technical information. I hope you don't mind and it's useful for you and you appreciate the comparison. A lot of people asked for this comparison because it's such a natural assumption to compare these two cameras based on the same full frame equivalent field of view and full frame equivalent widest open aperture. And yes, these cameras have certain main elements in photography in common, and nevertheless, they are totally different. And I really wanted to make this clear. There is one more thing I want to mention, which I didn't mention so far, namely that besides the many differences, we have another similarity. Both cameras have in their ecosystem remote shooting capabilities. Here on the Leica Q3 43, you use on iOS the Leica Photos app. On the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, you use Focus Mobile 2. And of course, you can use this for remotely steering and shooting your camera. And I have videos about this on my channel. And last but not least, would I be able to make a recommendation? Well, I think I showed you everything I can possibly show you about these two camera systems. I hope I didn't skip anything that was important to be mentioned, but I think it was hopefully pretty comprehensive. And what you decide for yourself, whether you want to own a Leica Q3 43 or whether you want to use a Hasselblad X2D Mark II as your system camera to go to, depends pretty much on your own preferences and what else you have as shooting gear, of course. I think the Leica Q3 43 plays extremely nicely together with the Leica SL3 as a system camera. Then you have a compact camera and a system camera, and the platforms are the same. And I showed it in a video some time back. The graphical user interface is the same. The sensor is the same. The shooting capabilities, functions, features are the same. If you master a Leica SL3, you will immediately master a Leica Q3 43 and vice versa. On the Hasselblad side, I personally believe if you're a Hasselblad shooter and you own a Hasselblad X2D Mark II, or maybe even back then a Hasselblad X2D, a Leica Q3 43 will be an ideal supplement for your shooting gear. Because it's more compact, there will be situations where you will appreciate the smaller form and size factor, and it has some capabilities the Hasselblad does not have, like faster autofocus. It has the full IP52 weather sealing certification, And of course, it has video shooting capabilities. And if you shoot video only from time to time, why not buying, in addition to a Hasselblad system, a Leica Q3 43 with this fantastic focal length, in particular for people photography, for video shooting, and then enjoying the best of both worlds. I think there are many ways how you can combine this camera with a second camera or the Q3 43 with a system camera. It really depends on your preferences, the platforms you like, the shooting habits you have, and the applications you want to use this gear for. So I leave it up to you, but drop me a comment what you think. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel, there's always more to come. Thanks for watching, stay safe and healthy, and of course, peace out.